will follow it and beyond. Yes, the language of power, but also the power of language, because our language is also a way of showing power. Not enough, but yes, it's part of the power. Tonight we will speak in the same spirit, and the core message, once again, Europe is in danger. And I wish it were different, but the last 2 years have seen a serious worsening of our strategic environment, to the extent that I am convinced that today we are living through the most dangerous moment of the post-Cold War period, the most dangerous moment since the Cold War ended. We face the risk of a major military conflict on our continent. Russia, 100,000 or more troops and heavy equipment on the Ukrainian border. It's making open threats to use force unless its demands are met. At stake, there is the fate of Ukraine, but also the wider principles of European security. But it's not just about Russia and Ukraine. We have an unprecedented number of conflicts brewing beyond our borders. At our borders or beyond our borders. Syria, still not solved. Libya, the Sahel, every day becoming worse. The Horn of Africa. I'm going to fly to the Horn of Africa the day after tomorrow. And in the wider world, the pandemic has exposed and accelerated these underlying trends. A friend of mine says that the pandemic has been acting as a contrast fluid, showing where the problems are. And we see clearly how our world is marred by aggressive competition among states, with US-China strategic competition as the main structuring force or restructuring force of this century. Military conflicts still exist, but most are the invisible ones. There's a book about it, The Invisible Wars, everywhere, and the weaponization of everything. Migrants, vaccines, energy, technology standards, this outer space, the cyberspace, the deep sea, everything is being weaponized, and it acts as a political amplification of conflicts. And there is a geographic shift of power between the West and the East, from the Atlantic to the Indo-Pacific. I'm not discovering anything, but I have to mention it. And also a functional one. Away from governments, our world is being transformed by financial markets, technological giants, media conglomerates, crime syndicates, and sleeper cells. All this is happening when the capacity of the multilateral system is at weakest point on the last 30 years, because relations among the main actors are conflictual, international cooperation has ground to a halt, and all international organizations that we need, they don't have enough power and capacity. We have the risk of living in a multipolar world, but not in a multilateral world. In a nutshell, we have the coming together of the problems of the 19th century. Remember, 19th century was the clash of empires. The 20th century, it was the age of power politics. And the 21st century is the weaponization of interdependency. Interdependency was supposed to bring peace through cooperation. But now interdependency is also a weapon. So there is a risky cocktail. More problems, more serious, more interrelated, and less capacity to cope with them. This is why I say Europe and its security are in danger. We need answers on the crisis of the day, and every day brings a couple of crises. Ukraine, Russia is the last one. And the European security architecture, a more structural one, but also on the wider challenges that we are facing. And I think that Europe, European Union, we have a choice to make. Either we seriously invest in our collective capacity to act, or we accept being an object and not a subject in foreign policy, and then scale back the rhetoric of being a geopolitical actor. Nice to say, but difficult to implement. And what is missing, which is the missing ingredient? Political will. This morning at the European Parliament, the parliamentarians were telling me, we don't have enough political will, and that's true. That's another cliché, but that's true. Because, as I said at the beginning, most clichés contain an important part of truth. Let's jump to the second part of my talk with you today, the Ukraine-Russia crisis. This crisis didn't start last December. Russia has been undermining the European security order for years. Its military build-up comes after previous uses of force against Ukraine, in Crimea, in Donbass, and Georgia. It's taking place against the backdrop of Russia's aggressive use of disinformation on cyber attacks in our neighborhood and inside the European Union itself. Not to mention the actions Russia has been taking in Syria, in Libya, the Wagner Group now arriving to the Sahel, before the Central African Republic. My point is not to repeat the litany of our differences with Russia's Putin, but to be realistic and to acknowledge that we have profound disagreements with the President Putin government, or I can say Putin's regime, and that in spite of that, Russia is there, and we have to engage with Russia in some issues in which we have common interests or common concerns. But the crisis is not just about Ukraine, it's about European security order, because Russia is trying to turn back the page of the history, to turn back the clock, and go back to the spheres of influence that belong to the past, to the Yalta time. Tensions has been risen, and so too has the pace of international diplomacy. Have you seen these last 2 weeks? There has been a diplomatic surge with an intense and multi-layered diplomatic efforts and meetings here and there, Geneva, Brussels, Vienna, and tens of video conference and phone calls. In all this, the European Union has two priorities: diplomacy and deterrence. Both. We need both, and each depends on the other for success. We need diplomacy and deterrence, and one supporting the other. We discussed yesterday at the Foreign Affairs Council with Secretary Blinken, that joined us via BTC, and you have seen the outcome, so I will only summarize our main action tracks. We have to continue coordinating our search for de-escalation and contribute to all diplomatic efforts, and certainly we are coordinating with the US as I could never have imagined, in a very, very close and permanent way, and now we are working on the written response that will be sent this week to Russia, answering their proposals. As a deterrent, we are preparing a set of strong sanctions in case Russia decides to take further military action against Ukraine. And we must be ready for all scenarios, and the nature of our response must match the nature of Russian choices. The sanctions decision will probably be the most consequential leverage that the West, or at least the European Union, has. And we will do it in cooperation with the US and others, but at the end here, in the European Union, it will be a Council decision. And everybody is talking about sanctions, but allow me to remember that it's my responsibility as High Representative to propose to the Council this package of sanctions that the leaders will have to accept by unanimity. Someone has to propose, and others, the Council, will have to decide. And then the High Rep, together with the Commission, will have to implement. At the same time, we are expanding our support to Ukraine in order to make Ukraine better able to resist Russian pressure. And you know, since 2014, since Crimea times, we have supported Ukraine with 17 billion euros. And now we are increasing our financial support, both from the Commission side and from the European Peace Facility. We have an advisory mission there, and we are considering, I am proposing, to send a military higher education component in order to increase their resilience and military capacities. We all know that Russia has many means to undermine Ukraine, and cyber is prominent among these. You were asking about it this morning, Nathalie, at the Parliament, and we see that last week. And that's why we have signalled our readiness to assist Ukraine with a cybersecurity expert, and we have a mission ready to go to Ukraine if Ukrainians request for that. And finally, and longer term, there is the energy dimension, where again the European Union role is key. And the truth is that Russia has made its economy more sanctions-proof, has been building a strong resilience. Russia is today the third holder of assets in dollars, $400,000 million. It's not the times of 2014. Russia is financially much more resilient today, but we have not done the same on the energy field. And we must reduce our dependency on the Russian energy, and this is going to be playing an important role in our relations with Russia. It's very much important that we will be able to implement our Green Deal. This is going to be a game changer in geopolitics. This means what you mean, renewables, greater diversification of routes and sources from abroad, and it also will affect our immediate neighbours in the Mediterranean. The third item of our discussion today, the strategic compass. The strategic compass is for me a way of trying to make the Europeans to face our strategic responsibilities. And this crisis, the Ukraine-Russia crisis, has demonstrated that we face an increasingly competitive strategic environment. But once again, the debate on European security goes far beyond the Ukrainian and Russian crisis. Look around us, the Balkans, the Middle East, Africa, the Indo-Pacific. These days, threats are coming from everywhere and manifest themselves in all strategic domains. So we need to see the whole board and adopt a truly comprehensive approach to security. And this is the philosophy of the strategic compass, presented last November, and I hope it will be approved by the European Council in March. I know that a lot of papers have been produced in Brussels about defence and strategy, and some of them have been presented here among these walls. But this, allow me to say, has the ambition of being different, because it's not only an analysis, but a proposal of concrete actions and tools, with deadlines and measures of the progress that we do or we don't do. That's what we make the difference. And thanks to Charles and others has been working a lot on that, we want to produce a follow-up process to ensure implementation, because the important thing is the implementation. We need ideas, but we need to bring these ideas into action. That's why, that's how the major differences with, I don't want to dismiss them, the 2003 EU security strategy of my friend Javier Solana, or 2016 global strategy. The goals were different, and the purpose were also different. The strategic compass is a package for the action, not just analysis, but a recipe for action. I don't want to go in a lot of detail into the compass, It's only 35 pages, grouped under 4 work strands: to act, to ensure, to invest, and to partner. And let me highlight just a few of the main ideas of this strategic compass that today they are mainly more important due to the crisis that we are living. I think that the European Union should be able to rescue citizens, for example, in a situation like we saw in Afghanistan last summer, or intervene quickly in a crisis where violence is threatening the lives of civilians, not just training the armies of the others, but to put boots on the ground and having the risk of having casualties to combat. It's in the treaty. I'm not inventing anything. To combat is one of the missions in which the European Union has to be engaged, can be engaged. But how? And that's why we propose a new rapid deployment capacity. The words are important: rapid deployment capacity, to allow a quick deployment of 5,000 troops for different types of crisis, for different type of crisis. It's the crisis who determines the tool. It's the crisis who determines the military concept, not the other way around. We want to have regular life exercises. It has never been done among European armies, to promote a faster, more flexible decision-making, and to ensure greater financial solidarity, enlarging the scope of the common cost. It's important also. Who pays? It's also important. I know very well when we discuss how to share the burden, the financial burden of our missions. We propose to create a hybrid toolbox and expand our capacity to tackle disinformation and foreign interference. The point here is to mobilize all our tools, including sanctions and response teams. Now we are going to do cyber exercise organized by the French presidency, and it's important that we have the capacity to develop together a cyber response capacity. We must also deepen investment into the strategic enablers of next generation capabilities, future combat air systems, capability for a space-based Earth observation. When I come to this point, at any moment, wherever, immediately there is someone saying, I hope someone will be saying here also, what about NATO? That's very nice, but what about NATO? Well, nothing about NATO. Let me stress that NATO remains at the heart of Europe's territorial defense. No one is questioning that, but I feel obliged to repeat it every time we talk about the strategic compass. Immediately after, I have to say, and look about NATO. NATO is at the heart of the European territorial defense. No one is questioning that, but this should not prevent European countries from developing their capabilities and conducting operations in our neighbourhood and beyond. It should not prevent us from thinking about how we would like to have the security system in Europe. To think about it, it doesn't weaken NATO. It makes us stronger. And to think about it doesn't make us in a, let's say, more complacent approach to Russia. One can perfectly have an autonomous thinking about the security system in Europe and being very tough with respect to Russia. I have to say that every time because it's not either EU or NATO, it's both. And let me also add that hesitations to move ahead on this agenda is not coming from the US. It's coming from the European Union. I don't think the resistance is an American resistance because they were suspicious or in disagreement with the fact that the Europeans have a stronger capacity. It's from inside the family of the European member states. I think more and more the US wants a stronger and more capable European defence to contribute to the global and transatlantic security. More and more, and especially with this administration, the idea of the Europeans having capacities to act is not something that makes them reluctant or contrary, is inside European Union member states where this resistance comes from. What the Americans tell us is, yes, okay, don't talk, act. Don't talk, act. Please, get on with it and help us to share the security, to burden the security burden. Naturally, we must remain faithful to Europe's way of doing security. We know that purely military responses are inadequate and sometimes counterproductive. We have seen this time and again in Afghanistan, in Sahel, elsewhere. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from these experiences. We need a comprehensive understanding of security and locally owned political settlements. And that's why the Compass put a lot of emphasis on our integrated approach, bringing together civilian and military instruments, investing in cooperation and multilateral solutions. This is our trademark, and we must stick to wherever we operate around the world. In some places, we will not win the war if we don't win the peace. And the Sahel is one of these places. Conclusion. Why now? As I said at the beginning, the history of European integration is full of plans to strengthen the European Union role on security and defence, must have come and gone. So why people should believe that today is going to be better? Which is the difference this time? My answer lies on the speed. It's a matter of speed. The speed at which the geopolitical context is changing. Because this speed is so big that makes the case for action much more urgent and compelling. All the threats that we are facing are intensifying, and the capacity of individual member states to cope is insufficient, and worst, is declining. We have less capacity. The member states of the European Union today, they have less capacity to face the challenges than yesterday, because they haven't increased their capacity and the challenges has increased a lot. The gap is growing, and this is unsustainable. And my job has been just to sketch it out. But the result will not depend on my strategic papers, but on actions. And I have to remember that these belong to the member states because they hold the prerogative and they hold the assets. They have the competences and they have the capabilities. The Commission, I am the Vice President of the Commission also, and I know very well that one of the strengths of the European Union is to put together all the capacities from trade to cooperation that the Commission masters. But the states, the intergovernmental pillar, is where the defence capacity is mainly concentrated. They have the competences and they have the capabilities. And I have to say, I am finishing with that I am glad that the member states' reaction has been very positive, much more positive than the one I was expecting. And thank you, Nathalie, because you have helped a lot to that. They are fully engaged in the process, and we are now building the consensus that we need to adopt in March. I am even a little bit worried because it's too good, and and when there is not a certain level of discussion, maybe people don't care, and it wouldn't be good if they say, okay, I am going to say you, but don't bother me. I need a little bit of controversy. But by the time being, things are going well. The document is passing all the tests, and with the small changes, no water poured into the wine, the level of ambition remains the same, and I think that if things go like this, the strategic compass will reach the Council in March. And then the ultimate test will come, because the questions for today's debates is, will this strategic compass be yet another plan, or it's truly a new beginning? Well, politically, the choice is similar to when we launched the euro or when we launched the recovery plan. And this kind of things happens when the cost of non-Europe or the cost of not acting became so high that people are ready to rethink their red lines and invest in a truly European solutions. Something that was a taboo suddenly is being overcome because the reality pushes. And maybe this is the moment in which reality pushes, like the virus pushed us to overcome the taboos of common debt and substituting grants by loans, or loans by grants. Maybe it's a moment like the German reunification when we launched the euro. Or maybe the crisis is not big enough in order to push us to overcome these difficulties. Let's take care, because in the international politics and in defense and security, it's a bad idea to wait for a bigger crisis, because in this field the crises are dangerous, much more dangerous than in other sectors of political making. So when the euro, when the recovery plan, we decided to jump together, and in both cases the result has been good. Let's make the same thing now, to jump toward an European security and defence which is something more in accordance with the expectations of the citizens who, as has been explained before, they understand clearly that Europeans will be providing security at a cheaper cost and with more sense of unity if we were acting together. That's why we have been writing this paper, and I thank you a lot for having the opportunity of discussing with all of you and with the people who are following this event through plasma. Thank you.
And now, Valentina, may I give you